Let's bring in Matthew Bryza now, a former US ambassador to Azerbaijan. Matthew, thank you very much for speaking to us here at TRT World. Now, the developments in the US will no doubt be closely followed in Kyiv. Would Kamala Harris likely continue Joe Biden's legacy of staunch military support for Ukraine?
I hate to say it's difficult to tell because that's a really weak response, but she really hasn't charted her own path on foreign policy at all. She's followed the lead of her boss, who is as staunchly pro-NATO and pro-Ukraine and as we could want as a U.S. president. She has so dutifully this year at the Munich Security Conference, again, underscored strong support for Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity and condemnation of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. And also at just last month, the Geneva Peace Summit in Switzerland also condemned Russia's invasion of Ukraine. But she hasn't had a chance yet to chart her own way in foreign policy. My guess, though, is that her instincts are going to be where Biden's are, which is NATO is at the center of U.S. foreign policy and fighting for Ukraine to repel Russia's invasion and maintain its sovereignty is going to be a centerpiece of her approach to Ukraine. But that's a guess.
And presumably this will be a guess to the answer to this question, but what would Kamala Harris's candidacy mean for Israel as it confronts this increasing global isolation over its war on Gaza? Can we expect any meaningful shift from either party, not just the Democrats, but the Republicans too, on Gaza?
Yeah, that's less of a guess because, you know, the domestic political salience of Israel or Israel-Gaza is much stronger right now than Ukraine. And so she has repeatedly reiterated the full support of the U.S. government for Israel's right to fight back and protect itself, but has also gone a bit further, I think, than President Biden publicly in also calling for, of course, the rights of the Palestinians in Gaza and their security to be protected, and also, you know, criticizing Israel's killing of so many Gaza civilians, Palestinian civilians. So I think her approach is clearer, but it'll be similar to Biden's, which is Israel has a right and a need to defend itself, but Israel needs to minimize the deaths of Palestinian civilians. I think she'll make that point a bit more vigorously than Biden has.
Worth talking about China too, because in recent months, both Biden and Trump have tried to show voters who can best stand up to Beijing's growing military strength. Where does Biden's decision leave the US on China?
Yeah, as you say, exactly. Biden has continued Trump's tariffs on China. And has also, as has Kamala Harris, condemned China's aggressive stance in the South China Sea, and with regard to either the real or artificial islands there, and its increasingly aggressive, very aggressive threats to Philippine fishermen and Coast Guard. So Kamala Harris has fallen in line with Biden's approach. Also, she has reiterated the U.S.'s strong support for Taiwan, though she hasn't gone as far as Biden has in a couple of times, saying that the United States would intervene militarily to support Taiwan were China to attack Taiwan.
Many Europeans, back to Europe, Matthew, I did want to ask you, many Europeans were happy to see the back of Trump after years of disparaging the European Union, undermining NATO. How concerned do you think America's European allies will be right now?
Oh, I think they're really concerned, and that's reflected in how actively they've been courting either Trump himself or his political allies. Jens Stoltenberg, for example, the Secretary General of NATO, made a point to give his speech during NATO's 75th summit in Washington at the Heritage Foundation, which is seen as being very close to Trump. It's the author of the so-called Project 2025, which is ultra-conservative domestic policy and foreign policy project, although Trump claims to be distanced from it. But many of his former advisors are part of that project, so he's very close to the Heritage Foundation. And European allies, on the one hand, I think are really worried that Trump previously said that perhaps NATO's obsolete, He never recognized the importance of Article 5, which is the collective security pledge of NATO, and in fact said Putin should do, quote unquote, whatever the hell he wants to with NATO allies who don't pay 2% of GDP for defense. That sent a chill through a lot of NATO allies. But to give former President Trump credit, he did press our European NATO allies to live up to their longstanding pledge to allocate 2% of defense spending, 2% of GDP to defense spending. So that is an accomplishment of Trump. I think the European allies are afraid of Trump, but they also respect him. But I think they're going to miss very much Joe Biden's approach to foreign policy, which is not America first like Donald Trump, but it's NATO first. I think the default of Joe Biden is always think about how we can achieve and coordinate our goals with our NATO allies. And again, that will be greatly missed.
Matthew, really appreciate your thoughts and time. Matthew Bryza speaking to us live from Edinburgh here in the UK.